welcome to a Weekend Warrior, and this is going to be a sort of much easier one than usual because we're going to be painting 15mm, and what this will also function as, I suppose, is as a tutorial on how to paint 15mm Libyan skirmishers, but you can apply the same principles to anything in this small scale. So these are skirmishing javeliners or javelinmen who fought in the Carthaginian armies. So these are for a 15mm Carthaginian army that I've purchased many years ago from Essex Miniatures, but never got around to painting. So I thought, you know what, I can crack these out pretty quickly. So let's do it. So you can see here pretty simple miniatures. It's very difficult to see with the black undercoat. They're quite glossy actually, which is weird because I did use a matte can, but whatever, it doesn't matter, it's just the base coat, right, or an undercoat to be clear. So what we're going to do is, let me get my handy dandy pointing, I'll use this rather ragged paintbrush as a pointing device. So we've got skin, hair, a sort of tunic, which is weird, is described as red by Cilius Italicus, I believe, maybe Polybius as well. We have the javelin itself, and then we have these shields, and then just the rest of it's just skin, right? So the thing is that these shields are actually the wrong type. If you look at them, and I don't know if I can show you this, there you go, you can probably just about see it here. You've got an edge to it, right? So it's actually a hoplon, and not really the correct shield design. But what I'll do is I'll paint these in the way that they should be done, which is as a sort of like cowhide design. So to that end, here, give you a quick preview of the colors we're going to be using. So first and foremost, the skin, I'm going to use a sort of North African mix. So I'm going to start with whole red as a base coat for everything. And the nice thing about whole red is it's a reddish, very reddish brown. And the nice thing about it is it has great coverage. So it'll cover these miniatures nicely, and because there's a lot of red and skin on here, it's going to act as a good base coat for everything. So this will be essentially our second base coat. So the black is just there to allow us to make some nice deep shadows. Then what we'll do is we'll hit everything with this whole red, and then we'll work from there. The reason I use black undercoat with 15mm is I want really exaggerated highlights and really deep shadows, because these are really tiny miniatures. So when you're looking at them at range, you kind of want exaggeration to make it pop, yeah? Then what we'll do is we'll take some beige brown, we'll mix that in to create a skin tone, and then what we'll do is we'll add in a bit of sunny skin tone with beige brown, just to do like a highlight. Again, we want a sort of slightly cartoony finish, because with 15mm, you know, you don't really necessarily have the same depth of detail that you have with 28. Then here we'll start with for the red. I want to, again, quite a cartoony sort of bright red. So what I've done is I've decided to use these citadel colors that I have. I'm going to start with a base coat of Mephiston red over the whole red. Then I'm going to put some Evil Sin Scarlet on there, and then Wild Rider red. And then for the shields, as I mentioned, they are going to be sort of in various browny, whitey, sort of maybe blackish, whitish cattle colors. So what I've done is I've got a selection here of browns. So I've got saddle brown. I want a kind of dullish brown, so like you can see here, I've got saddle brown, I've got mahogany brown, which is a little bit richer, flat earth, which is a nice sort of, it's a warm but relatively flat brown. Then I've got some Iraqi sand, pale sand, and ivory to act as my counterbalancing colors there. And I'm just going to kind of make them sort of look roughly like cowhide. This is similar to how I've done my Numidians, which I'll show you when I do like a review of the army, I guess, at the end. And then this is a rather battered bottle of Spear Shaft Light 13C from Foundry. I'll use this for the javelin shafts. With javelin shafts and stuff, there's no point in 15mm trying to be clever and you know, do highlights and stuff. Just paint the damn thing a bright color so it stands out. Then I've got some some deep brown leather light C. Again, I'm using the light here, not bothering with the base. And this is going to be for the little baldric that they have that has a sort of sword hanging off it, and for the sheath. And then I've got chainmail from Foundry as well, which is I'm going to use for you know, the tip of the javelin and any other metal accoutrement. So that's basically the palette for these miniatures. It's quite limited, and the idea is that we can burn through these guys rapidly. And because I'm basing these two to a base, Sorry, black on black's not particularly helpful to look at, is it? But especially with these really mega shadows from my light. I need another light, really, don't I? Anyway, so with these miniatures, they're going to basically be in pairs. In pairs, so there'll be 4 bases coming out of this at the end, and then they will be based onto, oops, excuse the hands, and then they'll be based onto these 40mm by 20mm bases. So when they square up, they're 40 by 40, and they'll look nice and shiny and amazing. And we can manipulate them into whatever shape we want. So we could play DBA with them, we could play ADLG with them, we can play Armati with them. It doesn't really matter. You can do whatever you want with them, but 40mm frontage is pretty standard for 15mm. So that's where we're going to get started. And what I'll do is, I can't paint with a camera here. It's not an option, so I'm not even going to try. So what I'll do is I'll show you when I get through the first phase, just to give you an update as to where we're at, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so we've had a bash at the first few layers. You can see here I've just basically walloped whole red over everything. And then what I did was I started doing the tunics. So the thing with these miniatures, normally I do the skin first. I like to paint inside out, but with 15mm and I don't have so much brush control. And then also because the tunic is basically the largest surface here, I figured, you know what, I'll just get those done now. It's easier to tidy those up as I do skin than it will be to do it the other way around. So you'll notice a slight shift in reds here. So at the back here, this back 4, this is just done in the Mephiston red, which I mentioned in the first part. I finished doing this little standee here, and I thought to myself, you know what I'd really like to do is just mix up the reds a bit, just to break up the pattern, because I mean if they all look the same it's a bit boring in it. So it takes 2 minutes to switch paints. So I did 3 in a very old and grotty bottle of corn red, so it's a slightly darker red, and then I had the brainwave to do one of them in Screamer Pink. And the idea here is, if you look at that Screamer Pink, it's the one on the end here, it's a slightly more faded kind of look. And so my idea is that given that these guys are rocking it out in the North African sun, or the Mediterranean at least, the reds are going to fade due to sun and then obviously washing and so on. So we can see that we're getting there now. These figures of, like, at this point, I mean, in all honesty, if you finish the shields off, you could more or less call them done if you were super lazy. We're not going to do that today. We want to do a bit more on the skin and obviously other bits of the miniature. But yeah, so we're going to let these sit for a little bit. Now, you might ask yourself, are we going to do any washes or anything? Again, we might do a few washes on some of them just to sort of shift the tones on them. But generally with 15mm, what I'll do is I'll block in the colors, and it depends how I feel. With my fins, for instance, my World War II fins, I did base coats, washed with black, and then just touched up with the same colors again, and that worked really nicely for that army. For this one, I'm not so sure. My concern is with a wash is that it might knock down the tone a bit too much. So to that end, I've chosen to go for a more highlight method with extreme highlights instead, which hopefully we will see when we get there. So the next bit will be doing the skin, and then once we do the skin, I think what we'll do is probably go over and do these little spear shafts, because that's a quick and easy victory, right? Then it gets a bit more fiddly because we end up we have to do the hair, and these guys have got this cool sort of like mohawk type hairdo going on. We can do this. We'll do skin. We'll do spear shafts. We'll do hair, and then I think what we can try and do is do these sort of bulwark sword. You can see here maybe the sword straps, and then the actual scabbard itself, and then we'll finally probably focus on the shields. I might start getting some bases down on those now, just so that they're getting there, because those are going to require probably several layers of the sort of lighter tone just to make them stick. The thing with these figures is that if you consider how you're going to look at them, for the most part, you're going to look at them from the front, or your opponent's going to look at them from the front, in which case they're going to see the shields and the front of the faces, and then the tunic is the other big piece of them. Everything else is kind of background facing, right? And again, from our perspective on our side of the table, we'll typically be looking at the rear of the miniature, so that means we're going to be looking at the tunic. So it's worth putting a little bit of effort in there just to make sure they look good. So I'll give you an update in a moment when we're done with the next layer. Alright, so sort of a slight interlude here. As you can see, I've done the skin tones, and I ended up sort of playing around with the tones I had as I was going along, and settled sort of on this one, which is a mix of beige brown and whole red, and then followed up with a highlight of adding in a bit of sunny skin tone, so the whole red and beige brown mixed together, then adding in a dash of sunny skin tone for a sort of upper highlight. These ones here that I did first were done beige brown, then with a beige brown sunny skin tone highlight as well. And then what I did with these as well is I found that they were a bit too sort of bright, so I smacked some wash on them. The one on the far right here, which is the one I dislike the most, that's Seraphim Sepia from Games Workshop. You can see the washes back here that I tried out. Seraphim Sepia, Reichland Flesh Shade, and Agrax Earth Shade. And this is Seraphim Sepia, Flesh Shade, and Agrax Earth Shade. I quite like the Flesh Shade and Agrax. I'm not so. This one's fine, but this one had a slightly lighter set of paints on the skin tone anyway, so it sort of looks a bit different. But anyway, not a big deal. This one doesn't. I don't think these ones need the wash so much. The skin tones, the contrast isn't quite as pronounced, on account of the fact that I did a sort of halfway mix and then a little bit of a touch more. So this actually came out better, I think. You know, one of the things you might say is, well, should one really be messing around with your recipe as you paint? And you know, if I were painting, I don't know, like 1,000 red coats, yeah, as an example, for an American War of Independence army or something like that, then I can see the benefit of nailing down a formula that you like, or maybe perhaps instead several types of formula that you like that you can mix up, play with. But with this, I have very few figures here in real terms, so I've thought to myself, you know what I'll do? I'll just try different things as I'm going through. If it doesn't work, it's not a big deal. It's a quick fix, right? So I just go back and I just tidy it up or overpaint it. It's not a big deal. Now what you didn't see, I haven't done the spear shafts yet, which I said I was going to do, and then base coat the shields and the hair, obviously. That's because it's a really nice sunny day out here, so as much as this is my weekend warrior project, I am also going, you know, utilizing the time to go and work outside. So I've been filling holes this morning. We have some very intrepid dogs who like to dig, so if you give them a suggestion of a hole, they will carry on your good work, which means you end up with burrows, especially the terrier. She likes to dig. So I've just been filling those holes in to try and level the yard out. Anyway, so I'm a bit out of breath and a bit warm now, but what I'm going to do is do those javelin hafts, as I said, the spear tips, and then we'll do some shields, and I'll catch you in a little bit. We are done with where we wanted to get to. So what I wanted to show you is just what we've accomplished so far. So we've got the tunics done, and just done a base coat on the shield in various brown tones. You'll notice these enormous mold lines down the front. Now I thought I'd got these when I was cleaning these miniatures up, but of course my luck is always that I didn't get them well enough. So I should probably just run over it with an emery board or something to try and level it off, but part of me also just doesn't care. I'm going to be completely honest. So this is what we look like at the moment. We've got these four. This was just these were the guys with the base coat of Mephiston Red. I then used Evil Sun Scarlet as a highlight, and then on this one here, this is the ones that started off in Corn Red. I put on not Evil Sun Scarlet, I put Wazdaka Red as a highlight there. Let me just get you some focus there. And then the one on the left is the I think it's Screaming Pink Horror is the highlight that I put over the top of it. So he's a bit kind of the odd man out, but I I sort of did that on purpose. And then the spear shafts I did in a combination of spear shaft C from Foundry, which I showed you earlier, and also light brown, I think, from I think it was light brown from Vallejo. But anyway, doesn't matter. Just pick a brown, one that looks correct-ish, and then go with that. That kind of tends to work. So you can see we're getting into the homeward straights now. Still got to do the hair. I did the little baldricks and the swords. Just again, I chose sort of several brown tones, and then some bronze from Vallejo for the little sword hilts and cross guards. And then now the next step is going to be figuring out what to do about these mold lines. Just for context again, this is me working, doing bits and pieces whilst I'm pottering around the house and doing chores and such, and working in the yard. So it's not, I'm not sitting here and just absolutely grinding these out. This is sort of a best effort type action, and so far so good. We are very close to finished here. I just wanted to show you the cowhide shields that I did. So what I did was I base coated them. I tried to get rid of those center lines with a file, but didn't have much luck, to be honest with you. The sort of mold line seems to be too ingrained for that. So anyway, I gave up on that after scraping the paint up, of course. Rebase coated it, and then what I've done is I did a highlight of brown, adding in some white just to make it a bit, kind of give it a sort of edge highlight. And then I also did a variation of ivory and pale sand, so pale sand and ivory, and also off-white, little splotches, which I then highlighted with a sort of bit of white added to that as well, just to give it a slight tonal variance. And there you go, that's basically it. Alright, so we're very close to finishing here. I just wanted to show you how I base these miniatures. So a very simple method. I use the same for basically every army, and that is I bought these cheap Deco Art Americana paint pots. You can buy bigger, bulkier ones if you like. I just find that I use so little of this in real terms. There's no point buying giant buckets of it because I'm never going to get through it. But this is a really like cheap and cheerful sort of acrylic paint that I picked up from, I think, a Michaels or something like that here in America. So what you can see here, this is like a dark brown, a burnt umber color, right? And then I follow that up with a dry brush. So just kind of wet this down, water it down a ton, because it acts as a sealant as well for the sand. So I put some PVA glue on the bases, as you can see here, PVA glue on the base, and then I just get some ballast on there, really, some sand. Then what I do is I whack this on this dark brown with heavily watered down, so it gets in amongst all the bits and bobs on the base. Then I dry brush with this sort of ochre color, just give it a sort of dry brush to give it some definition. And then when that's dry, I come along with this color called buttermilk. It's basically a cream color, just to give it a sort of off-white, just to give it a slight sort of final highlight. And you can see the outcome here. Let me see if I can zoom us in a little bit and you can get a sense of what we've accomplished. And I'll tilt the camera down a little bit. There we go. Tighten that up. Sorry, my tripod's a bit wonky. Right, so, and you can see it looks quite good, doesn't it, from a distance. Then the final bit is these bases are from Essex Miniatures, are very old. What I do is I find that this Deco Art color doesn't really sit well on the edges there, so I use something a bit more pigment dense, and I just use burnt umber from Vallejo for that. But you could use scorched brown or any other dark brown or whatever color you like. Actually, you might want to lighten it up a bit and do a kind of mid brown, whatever. It's your miniatures, do what you want, right? But I find that looks really nice, and as you can see here, we'll just put them in a little block here so they kind of look the part. There you go, and they look pretty good. Now you might say, well, how is it that you use the same basing for everything? What if they're in the desert, blah blah blah? Well, so at present it looks like they're sort of, I mean, maybe it's a bit too dark, but they look good enough to be in, say, a desert somewhere in Middle East or whatever, I find that the more you apply the dry brush tones, you can basically swing it some more if you like. So you can just whack some more of the yellow on, and you'll get a more yellowy landscape. This works for me because these Numidians are likely to fight all over the Middle East, and it's not quite as dry and brown as you might imagine. But the other thing you can do as well is you can really kick it up a notch and decide where you're based in terms of geographics and climate by choosing the correct grasses. So if you choose yellowy, dry, dead grasses, then it'll look like you're in a drier climate. If you choose reds and flowers and so forth, and you put more static grass on there, it'll look like there's more ground cover, so it'll look wetter and more temperate perhaps. So in my mind, I'm just like, I need a simple method that I can repeat 1,000 times, that it's going to look good, look the same. I also wanted to kind of blend in with my terrain and stuff like that, so I don't want to really do something special. Alright, so here we are. I've just applied some tufts and such. You can see I've mixed it up, a little bit of green, a little bit of brown, a little bit of steppe grass, some flock, just to sort of break up the monotony of the bases, to add a bit of visual interest. And that's it. These are now fully done, and I think they've come out rather nicely, to be honest, given that it's taken me almost no time really to get them done. I'm rather pleased with that as a final outcome. Then what I'll do is I'll just turn these around again using the rule of, there we go. Let's just give you a sense of what they look like from the side, and then I'll just rotate them through. I don't have one of those fancy rotating jobbies that some people have, so you're going to have to bear with me as I manually manipulate the camera and the miniatures around. But given the speed at which I've painted these, quite pleased with that actually. PVA glue's a little bit wet on them, but it's now just about 11:15, and time for me to go to bed. And these miniatures are done, and I think you'll agree, I hope you agree, they look rather good.